Hi there, I am Stuart Bruce and I'm here for recordproduction.com, and today we are interviewing Heff Moraes. So, I think probably the first thing is, how are you?
I'm really well. It's great to see you after all these years.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time, yeah, but I'm great. I'm really good. Life is good.
Good. And we're here today in the PMC, kind of the demo room, really.
Yeah, it's a demo room, a mix
studio,
room.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, why are we here?
We're here because I do a lot of work with PMC.
Mm-hmm.
I really, I've been in this industry a long time and worked with many different artists and producers and brands. And PMC make great speakers, they sound great, but they're also a company who are not just making speakers, they're making music as well. They're very much in their DNA is the ethos of supporting artists, supporting producers. And this room is an example of that. This room is an Atmos room where the kind of what we're doing is helping mix engineers, producers and artists understand what Dolby Atmos is and what it can do for them and their careers. And I think, from the experience that PMC had in LA, where they built a room very similar to this, in fact exactly the same, and I saw a huge amount of success from that in getting people in LA onto the Dolby Atmos platform. So that's what we're doing here. We're helping, introducing people to Atmos, we've done a few album launches, we mixed a few albums here just to support the artists get onto the platform, because it can be expensive. There's a lot of equipment needed to get an Atmos room up and running. So we've done a few album launches and stuff like that with artists that we feel are influencers in the right spaces across different genres. And so that's what we're doing here.
But also you get to use the room yourself.
To use the room myself, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And so through this room, I've learned a tremendous amount about Atmos mixing itself, because before I came here, I was just a stereo guy. And I've really enjoyed that, and that's been a great education for me. And it helps me also, a lot of the stuff I do, managing and mentoring and teaching younger engineers about audio. The whole Atmos platform, I think, it can be a little bit bewildering. If you type in into YouTube Atmos, there's a gazillion videos there, but all of them confuse the hell out of me. So I think
that's an interesting thing, isn't it? About we are in this position now where the YouTube generation of the YouTube learning generation, and I think also going back into the stereo stuff as well. There's an awful lot of unusual or confusing information out there, and I think it's very difficult sometimes to glean the good bits.
Yeah.
And so if you are in a position to be able to go somewhere and actually learn from people who really do know what they're talking about, I think that's a really useful thing. I mean, I know certainly that's something that Mike's been doing for a long time with recordproduction.com is that idea of going to source, going to people that really actually are out there making the records that people are listening to and getting their take on how to do things. And so when it comes to something like Atmos, you've really got to be talking to someone who knows what's happening, because it's so complex.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we first met many moons ago, you were my teacher, you were my mentor at the time, and it was a very different world and a very different industry, and there was very different equipment. But the wonderful thing about the education I got at SARM with you was wonderful. It was intense. It was hardcore.
I think there might be some apologies needed during the course of this interview, in fact. But
no, but it was great. I was a kid, when I started at SARM, I think I was 17, and I didn't know what I was walking into. It was bewildering and exciting. And
what year was it when you started? Because I'm trying to remember this.
It was my first day there. I was remember the night receptionist role?
Yep.
I was the night receptionist, and Two Tribes was number 1 and Relax was number 2 that week. So Frankie Goes to Hollywood were there.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it was 84-ish. I don't know.
Must have been 84.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, because I left in the middle of 85, I think.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I left mid-85, so yeah.
So walking into that, and I was answering the door and the phone at the time. And actually, I don't know if you remember this, but my first session with you was a mistake. My first session with you was Band-Aid. Because I was answering the phone, and the studio manager, who I think was called Carol, came in and said to all the tape ops, "Oh, there's a charity session on Sunday. Who wants to do it?" And all the tape ops kind of went, "Not really."
Yeah.
And I kind of went, "I'll do it." And it ended up being me and Steve Reese. I had no idea what was going on or what being a tape op was. And to be fair.
But you actually ended up walking around with a portable tape recorder a lot of the time, and you actually recorded a lot of the vocal messages that are on the B side of the single. I remember that. Yeah.
So I walked into that with Steve, who was great, and had everything locked down, but I literally didn't have a clue what I was doing. So there were moments where I was in the control room and Steve was outside, and you'd ask me something, and I kind of go, "The fuck? What's he talking about?" And I remember, huge credit goes to you for that day, because I remember a very stressful day, and I remember that we were working on 2 analog tape machines, and the Q-Lock synchronization system was not working properly, and it took ages for everything to sync up. And I remember you struggling, trying to fit vocals everywhere. It was chaos, but you held it down really well.
It was chaos, yeah. It's probably the only session I've ever done where I couldn't actually stand up.
Yeah.
Because there were so many people standing around the back of the desk, and
I think I remember when everyone had left and it was just you, Bob, Midge, and a few other people. You actually said something like, and this is like we're 14 hours into. I think you said, "I think I need to go to the toilet."
It was the first time I went to the loo. Yeah. And that's when I went downstairs and discovered that there was a hole in the toilet door. And apparently that's because Status Quo had locked all of Spandau Ballet in the toilet, and they'd had to anyway, but it's another story for another time. But
So in that time, after that, for whatever reason, I went round with I think it must have been an F1 machine at the time.
It was an F1,
and recorded all of the artists doing it, and I got instantly promoted from not answering the phone anymore and it becoming a tape op. So I struck it lucky there. But I remember the training being very structured, almost like, not like a college, but because it was much more exciting than that, but very structured and very much like, this is the right thing to do and this is the wrong thing to do, which I now manage people and work with people who go to colleges, and I'm not sure that rigidity is there. Because with analog, if you did the wrong thing, you were in trouble. If you dropped in the wrong place, if you cut the tape in the wrong place, if you spliced the wrong tape, if you got stuff out of phase, all of those things that were you drummed into me. I am now, and from the age of probably 18, I'm physically allergic to out of phase. It makes me want to throw up. Because I was so scared of recording anything out of phase or with a phase. It literally, if I go to a festival or something and there's speakers out of phase, I have to get out of the space.
I know, it's uncomfortable, isn't it?
It's uncomfortable, and I think it's uncomfortable for most human beings. But for me, there was this deep-rooted fear of it because I knew it was from a very early age, it was the wrong thing to do. And I was working, there's some producers I manage. I walked into the session the other day and the bass was out of phase, and I said, "Guys, the bass is out of phase." And they were like, "Why is that a problem?"
Did the monocle slip? Yes. Did you start twitching? Yeah.
But, and those sorts of things are key. They're really important. It's those fundamentals, and I probably sound like an old fart here, but it's those fundamentals on which I've always based, and I think you've always based, and all of the mix engineers of our generation had no option other than to base our experience and our process on. So there were solid fundamentals.
But the relevance of those things now, They're as relevant, and in fact, they're becoming more relevant, I think, again at the moment. Because one of the things I've noticed is, my 17-year-old, the youngest of mine, he's got one of those Amazon Echoes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is really convenient. It's a great thing. It doesn't sound too bad. It's all right.
Yeah.
You know. And I use it occasionally because I like to check mixes on it. But what is it? It's bloody mono.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, it's stereo, it's this, it's not. Of course it's not. It's over there in the room.
Yeah.
By the time it's reached you, it's mono. Now, I have noticed how extreme that mono can be.
Yeah.
Playing certain tracks on it that I know really well that are very stereo and sound beautiful on headphones or on a pair of loudspeakers, a stereo system. Over there, suddenly you're getting the 3 dB raise in the middle, you're getting the dB raise in the middle, and the peripheral stuff is getting quieter.
Yeah.
Now, if you extrapolate that into out of phase bottom end, as soon as you play it through one of those things, there's going to be a very, very strange low end coming out of that device.
Yeah, absolutely.
So absolutely, one of the things I teach all my students now is there is a mono button on the desk for a reason.
Yeah.
On the monitor system for a reason, and use it, because if suddenly your balance changes, you've got to work on it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And I think you probably came in at the end of that, but because everything was going out on AM radio when I started, and it was in mono.
Yeah.
The single mix was always a panned-in version of the album mix, and it would have a different EQ.
Yeah. So all of those disciplines, if you like, that you've based your career on, recording and mixing, they haven't gone, in terms of education, they seem to have gone out the window, because, and I don't know because I've never done it, of course, but I've spoken to a lot of people who do, and I'm not talking about your course, but...
well, as I say, it really depends where you go.
Yeah. For a lot of the people I've spoken to who have been to courses in London have had the experience where they're taught how to use Logic, they're taught how to sample something and do, they're taught how to do stuff in the box, but they're not taught anything about signal path, gain structure, the importance of recording things at the right level, or they're not taught any of that. Or even, and this is a big thing that I'd learned very early on at SARM, the kind of etiquette in the studio. You're in a creative space, and your job as a recording engineer is to be the guy between the artistry and the equipment. Be that interface. And again, one of a couple of guys I manage were in a session, the first session I ever saw them in, someone was doing a vocal in the vocal booth. Take stopped, and they just started talking to each other. They didn't put the talk button on. I'm like, guys, what are you doing? There's a poor girl in there who's just sung her heart out, and it's a lonely place, that vocal booth.
It is,
especially after the first take.
Yeah,
that moment that you put the talk back down is key. Like, it's really important. And that communication. So all of those things, when to speak, when not to speak, when to have some input, and when you can steer the session, but you can steer it in the wrong way as well.
Oh yeah, it's very easy to go the wrong way.
Yeah.
I mean, experience teaches you, doesn't it? That it's what interests me there. Sorry, more than anything, is just that thing of you saying the engineer is the interface, and also the engineer is the one that has to sit in the space, and remain calm.
Yeah.
Everybody else can jump up and down and get excited and scream their heads off, but the engineer has to be that rock in the center of the session. Yeah. That holds everything together. And that's part of the role. And my experience at SARM taught me huge amounts of that, because that was a time when bands and artists, and maybe there is still a bit of this, but it's slightly different. It was a bit out of control. Egos, and I remember one particular session with the Pogues, which I was probably 20, and I'm trying to be that guy, the guy in control. There's the Pogues, Steve Lillywhite and Joe Strummer in the room. 20-year-old kid, I'm like, But I learned a lot from it. You learn fast.
You had to.
You had to learn on your feet.
Yeah. And of course, artists still have their challenges, but still, your job as the engineer is to make that connection with the equipment invisible, and to make sure that all of those sorts of small technical things that people might think are irrelevant, to do with phase and to do with gain structure and to do with the level, are just dealt with. They don't have to worry about them.
Yeah.
And you I'm sure you get it. I get sent mixes or multi-tracks these days, and you can just tell that all of the stuff was recorded way too low. The noise floor is all over the place. And you're just like, we've got really good equipment now. We've got great A to Ds. We've got great. Pro Tools is extraordinary, or Logic, or whichever DAW you use. Incredible. What you think back to, imagine doing Band-Aid on a DAW. Your life would have been very much easier.
I don't know, right? I don't know, because I like the limitations. Right?
Yeah.
Right? It's like the limitations. We did a thing with Ken Scott recently, and Ken and I were kind of, we weren't being grumpy old men. But what Ken said I thought was really interesting, which is something that echoes things that I've felt myself, which is at university, for example, don't allow someone to come in and immediately start working on as many tracks as they like in a DAW. Say to them, right, the first project that you're doing is going to be 4-track.
Yeah.
And so you've got to balance the drums to one track, and you've got to maybe balance the drums and the bass to one track, and make a decision at the time, and keep making those decisions, because that's the thing. Analog forced you into making decisions.
Yeah.
And also, if the guitar needed to be louder in the chorus on analog tape, if you actually pushed the fader up as you were recording it, because otherwise, because you couldn't automate, and you didn't want to be running a desk automation,
and you didn't want to be doing that all day long.
Exactly. So things got recorded at proper levels, and a lot of focus was on creating the sound before it hit the tape.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I've never actually done it, but I keep meaning to do it with some of the younger producers and engineers I work with, to say to them, let's just work on a 4-track or an 8-track analog tape machine. And just do a project like that and see how. But I was moved away from it because I just thought that I was being an old fart and just pushing them down a filter for no apparent reason. But I understand what you're saying, because the problem is that all the options are open now.
Yeah.
And as you say, that type of thinking or that type of way of working forces you to make decisions. Like we were talking about Bowie earlier. When Visconti recorded the vocal on Heroes, he did it with a gate, so that as Bowie sang louder, the vocal got more ambient. Like you would never, I couldn't convince a producer to do that now. But that's that sort of.
And he had one track left on the tape. I mean, this is the thing. He had he literally the 24-track tape was full, except for one track. And so the other thing was, he gets to the end of a take and goes, "That's great. I really love that." And David Bowie says to him, "I want to do another one." And he goes, "Well, you've got to be better than the last one." And then you're making that call as a producer as well, aren't you? Do I really believe that the artist is going to do this better, or do I go with what's there? Do I fight to go with what's there?
No, absolutely.
And, it's like the idea nowadays for someone who's recording in a DAW to say to them, well, that's it, you've only got one track, and so you're going to have to erase what you just did in order to do it again.
The
level of bravery there,
it's
which
a huge
is
level of bravery. I mean,
but that was a regular, everyday decision for you.
Yeah, and that's changed the way that artists behave as well, because artists understand. Bowie, when he was doing that vocal, understood that was a performance. And I'm not saying that artists don't get themselves focused in the studio nowadays, but I am saying they know they've got if an unlimited amount of takes. They can do and often do. And I'm not 100% sure what the benefit of that is sometimes. You can, I sometimes sit in sessions and the producer's going over and over and over. It ceases to become a performance all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's that thing, and also there were other different methodologies that we would use. You know,
Yeah.
some singers would like to be dropped in for a verse and then dropped in for the chorus, so they could focus on that one section and get the performance exactly as they wanted it.
Yeah.
Other people would like to go front to end. You know.
Yeah.
But I used to work with singers all the time that literally would do a take from start to finish, and you'd go, "That's great," and they go, "Do you want me to do it again?" And you go, "Well, not really. It sounds great." And that would be it.
Yeah.
It's a mindset.
No, absolutely. I mean, I remember you'll remember this. You remember in Studio One at SARM, the SSL had, I think it was a 48 chassis, it's 48 channel chassis, but we only had 40 channels. And I was working with Brian Ferry on an album. The album was called Boys and Girls. Rhett Davis was
Rhett
producing.
Davis, yeah.
And it was a Sunday night, and we had to recall a mix. There was a track called Don't Stop the Dance. We had to recall a mix that was done at the power station. So we rented in tons of gear. The recall took ages. Of course I couldn't get it bang on, but it was pretty close. Brian Ferry was supposed to come in, and the power station SSL was 48 channels, so I nicked 8 channels from Studio 3. And half didn't tell anyone.
Very wisely, I would imagine. Yeah.
So Brian Ferry was supposed to come in at 8 p.m. and he didn't turn up till 4 a.m. or something. So I knew that there was a session coming, and I had to get those channels back into the studio. So it's getting to like 8 a.m. or something, and I'm just kind of, and I say to Rhett, "Look, in order to do this, I've borrowed these channels. I need to get them back quite soon." And I think something happened, like someone turned up and kind of went, "Where are those channels?" And it all started to kick off. So I said to Rhett, like, "We've run out of time." Brian Ferry said, "It's all right. Let's put the mix to tape. I'll do the vocal." That was the last verse he wanted to redo. He did the verse live to Half Inch. And it's on the record. It's like, you wouldn't get that anymore. He was so confident that he could get it better.
Yeah.
That it wasn't we ran out of tracks, it was we ran out of time. And that was the thing. We did it. It was, it's extraordinary.
Absolutely. I mean, there's that lovely story of John Martin doing. It's the album Solid Air, and it's got May You Never on it.
Yeah.
Which is just that beautiful acoustic, guitar and voice, and it's the simplest track on the album. But also, it's probably the most famous track that he ever did in many ways. That song,
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And apparently, when they went to master it, it got to the end of the evening, and they just finished mastering the album. And he went, "I don't like that version of the track that's on there." And he said, "I need to do it again." And he had his guitar with him, so they went into the studio next door at like 11 o'clock at night. He banged down a couple of takes and went, "I like that one," and that's what's on the record.
Yeah.
They just cut it in.
Yeah.
And it's those things, isn't it? It's like those little performance moments, which, and it's like there was a necessity in it, because literally he was at the last possible moment that he could make that decision. And
in both instances, the engineer's job is to try and make the equipment as invisible as possible. I probably failed in that with my 8 channels because I didn't do it in the right way, but we had to find an option. We had to find a solution, and that was the only solution.
But also, I think that's one of the things that comes out of the sort of the studio environment, and particularly the way the studios were through the 60s, 70s and 80s, is that because you had a technical department, because you started as an assistant and you worked your way up to becoming an engineer, you got an education across multiple areas, because at 3 o'clock in the morning, if the desk breaks, somebody needs to be able to fix it, and you can't always call the maintenance engineer up and get them to come in. So a quick fix of something, or just being able to swap a channel in the desk, was essential stuff.
No, absolutely, and that was a huge part of the education at SARM. Exactly that. You had to have some sort of technical ability. I can't solder or any of that sort of stuff, but I had to understand the basics of the technology and the basics of the logistics of like swapping a channel out, or even changing an EQ card. I could do that kind of stuff because I had to. And because the technology has changed, what that's sort of become now, I suppose, is deleting preferences or something. Do you know what I mean? I don't even know.
It's a slightly more static occupation.
Yeah, no, I mean but it's not as hands-on as it once was.
Yeah,
which is a shame.
Yeah, I think it would be great. I mean, you know, it's this idea of how you get people to record in a different way or approach the recording in a different way. It terrifies me when people are literally going straight into an interface with the microphone. Mm-hmm. And then the first thing that happens is all the plugins come out.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, you haven't actually recorded it. To me, it doesn't feel like you've recorded it properly until you kind of do you need to EQ it? Should it have a touch of compression on the way in? All of those things.
Yeah.
Because it also relates to what the artist hears in their headphones
and
as
how
they're performing it.
Yeah, 100%.
You know? It's like if you've got a very dynamic vocal and you're controlling that with compression, the singer knows that they can really go.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be too much because the compressor's going to hold it, and it gives them a sound and a kind of excitement in there. You know,
well, 100%. I mean, and strangely enough, where that happens a lot is in hip hop, and it makes a massive difference, compression in hip hop, because if you've got a rapper with a kind of transient attack in their voice, the way in which you compress that on the way in is going to change the way they perform. So, I mean, I know that for a fact. So what often happens is people just, as you say, plug the mic in the back. There is a recorded performance, and then a load of plugins go on it, which completely change almost the timing of the delivery. And in hip hop and rap, that's really important.
Yeah.
So you know, one of the things I've got another studio I run called Tape is I've got a lovely mic amp and a lovely valve compressor and a lovely mic, and the signal path goes through that. And a lot of people come in and kind of go, well, what's the compressor there for? I can do that in a plug-in. And I try and explain, and usually it makes sense. And actually I think people really begin to understand why, you know, the attack and release time is going to change your performance. You're going to get different response from the artist as a result of tweaking that.
Yeah, and I mean, I would imagine if you're a young, inexperienced rapper, you know, it doesn't matter how talented you are, if you're walking into an environment where suddenly you're given that kind of specialist approach to recording your voice, where you can suddenly hear in the headphones that you're performing and it's starting to sound like maybe some of the people that you really admire, and or you know, because I mean, we all start out to a certain degree emulating someone else, don't we? As well, there's always a degree of that. I think for every musician, you've got your heroes, and you want to be able to play a little bit like them. Yeah. And it's all the same for singers and rappers too, I think. Yeah, no, absolutely. You start to hear that character going on there. That's going to give you confidence, and it is going to affect your performance for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was something that Trevor Horn, that we both worked with, really taught me about the experience, the artist's experience in that booth, particularly when it's a singer on their own, but also, you know, when there's a band playing together. What their experience is going to change everything. Yeah. Like, and from the moment they walk into the control room, the atmosphere in the space, the way in which you give them a cup of tea, the whole thing. I mean, I remember the first time I worked with him being a bit like, why is he going on about the tea? But it was all about the experience. It was all about every detail had to be right in order for the artist to feel in the right space. And, you know, the artist would turn up and we wouldn't record anything for hours, talk about this, that, the other, and I'd be sitting there going, oh, it's 4 a.m. like. But actually it was just Trevor creating the right vibe. And when he felt it, and he generally had a knack of getting it right. Yeah, he was very, very good he's very, very good at getting performances out of people. Because they knew that they were being respected. They felt special. He paid them attention in a way that made them feel special. Because to him they were special. They're musicians. You know. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? It's like you go into music, and if you don't respect the music, I mean, I worked with producers when I was in purely engineering in the 80s, and I'd work with producers who didn't respect the musicians.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, why are you even there?
No, I mean that's why I say it's Trevor really instilled that in me, and Steve Lipson, who I worked with, also. That was one of their fortes. They were really good at creating the environment and creating the space that felt like the right mixture between fun and work. It was always with Steve. I mean, you know Lippo. Every day is fun. Like you're not going to walk into a session and not have an eventful day with Steve.
Yeah.
So it made it compelling, and I worked with Steve for probably 20 years. And I never had a boring day. Every day was fantastic.
I've got some questions for you, very particularly about some of the records that you did at that time. I mean, one of the records I adore this record. It's that album Diva with Annie Lennox.
Yeah.
Who, I mean, I'm a huge Annie Lennox. I love her voice.
Me too.
And what a performer, and someone who can, on one song, sound absolutely terrifying, and on the other, on the next song, or in the same song, can suddenly become the most tender and beautiful voice. You know.
Yeah.
There's that song Why.
Yeah.
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 So, I have got it's a bit of a nerdy question, right?
Okay.
But can you remember recording that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I mean, it would certainly, if I'd recorded that, I would remember. How's, vocal, as far as that kind of vocal sound, that kind of approach to, how would you approach that?
So with Annie, I mean, before doing the album, I was a huge Eurythmics fan. It was her first solo album. So when I started the project, we recorded the album in the attic of her house. She just had her first daughter, very recently. So she wanted to be at home. So she had this, at the time, a lovely house in Maida Vale. And we built a studio in the attic, which frankly was a nightmare because it was back in the day. There was no air conditioning there. It was on, I think, the 5th floor. It was we had two Sony 3324s, which I'm sure you remember aren't easy to carry, and getting them up the stairs. It was a nightmare.
Yes, we used to have a lot of fun taking those up and down the stairs at SARM, didn't we?
Yes,
until I refused to do it anymore.
Yes, I remember that too. So we started the album with her. I was in awe, but she is the most wonderful, warm, welcoming human being. So we were, and you would think it would feel strange recording an album in someone's home, but every night we'd have dinner with her and her husband and a baby and everything. It just felt like being at home. It was a really lovely environment to work in, and she would do the vocals just in the room because we had no other option. And Why is an interesting one because Why took a long time. And her first take of the vocal is the take. We tried to redo it many times. It's actually what you're talking about. Because that's a very emotional song about a relationship that she had. And at the time that she wrote it, she recorded it. The vocal that's on the record is that vocal. So it's the reason it sounds as raw and emotive as it does is that she'd just written it. We tried lots of times and we never got it to sound as good as that. So Why was an interesting one because the demo of the track was it's a great song, but it was a pad, some drums, but it was just very slow, a tambourine on the 4 and the bass and the vocal and the backing vocals, and we knew it was a great song, but it just kept not sounding like a single. It didn't have a emotion to it. And Steve Lipson but he was really pushing this. We've got to get some movement in it. We've got to get it so it doesn't sound so still. So he got, I can't remember the name of the guy. He was the drummer from Japan. And
Steve Jansen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He got him in, and Steve Jansen programmed this extraordinary brush pattern, and that was a game changer. Suddenly we got movement in it, and that completely changed the feel of the track. And then we were working a lot with an amazing keyboard player called Peter Jean Vitesse, or PJV, and again we were, even with the brushes, we felt we needed more movement in it. And it was one of those days, I'm sure you had them in the studio, where we were working on this track and we weren't making any progress. We were just stuck. And I think Steve said, let's go out and get some cake. And in Little Venice, there's a lovely cafe that overlooks the canal. And I remember we sat down there, and Peter was kind of, lovely bit of cake. And it was that, we went back after that, and Peter came up with the 8s. It starts as a harpsichord or an acoustic guitar that runs throughout and that was it. As soon as he did that, I mean, he literally walked back in after the cake, played that we knew we had a hit. That was a game changer.
It's like a kind of arpeggiated acoustic guitar, but it's on the keyboard.
Yes.
Was it an Ensoniq? Because I remember Peter used to use Ensonics all the time.
I don't think it was an Ensoniq, because I think it was a JV 1080.
Okay.
Because I remember programming the patches for, I think. I think it might have been that.
Yeah, no,
I might be wrong.
But it's an example, isn't it, that track of an astonishing vocal performance. I mean, absolutely incredible vocal performance that puts the hairs up on your arms every time. You know? But at the same time, it's an exhibition in stillness. Against motion. It's beautiful, the balance, and that's the secret.
That's the balance that Steve Lipson was pushing for. He was, and I was much younger then. When he kept going, I didn't know what he was talking about. I mean, I kind of did, but I didn't understand what he was trying to achieve. And it was that moment, those two moments where the brushes went on and that guitar went on, and suddenly it was like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
There's another great example, working with Annie on the next album, which was a cover album. We recorded that she had a house in Mallorca with the most extraordinary view I've ever worked in my life. So it was on the top of a mountain in Mallorca overlooking the Bay of Palma. So the control room looked out onto the Bay of Palma. It was just beautiful, and that was my view every day. It was a wonderful place to work. Her manager came over one time, and he and I and another friend of his went out and got absolutely raw, like really drunk, really drunk. And Steve Lipson didn't drink, so I came into the session the next day with the worst, like, you know, those hangovers where you can't. It was just horrific. I probably hadn't slept. It was awful. And Annie came in to sing the vocal on a track called Downtown Lights. And again, it was one take. It was her first take. But she sang this song, and I started crying. And I just kind of thought, it must be the hangover. It must be like, and I'm facing, Steve was behind me, and Annie's in front of me, and I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm crying from Annie, and I really don't want Steve, because he knows I've been on the piss the night before, and I don't want to get in any more trouble. So I'm kind of trying to hold it together. There's tears streaming down, and I can't really, I mean, it's beautiful, but I can't really understand why I'm crying. The take finishes, I turn around, and Steve's crying. And it was the most extraordinary, it was incredible. It was one of those moments where you're just like, we've just witnessed artistic genius. Like, she just reduced us both to tears, and we were in very different emotional states. Steve and I. So she got through all of that and hit us right, you know.
It's great, isn't it? How great is that? I mean, and you know, if you get one of those in a career. I'm lucky enough, I've had a lot of those, but that's one that really sticks out to me, because she had, as you say, her voice had that ability to take you on a journey, and sometimes it would get right into your soul where you'd be like, that's a little bit uncomfortable, and then she'd kind of pull you out with some little funny twerky thing. She used to call it squink. Squink.
Which is a great. She'd come in and like if a track wasn't quite odd enough, she'd be like, "Where's the squink?"
Yeah.
Which I always really like that
I like
reference.
the idea, yeah. You need something in a track, don't you, that just gives a little bit of a twist occasionally.
Yeah. So I think I did 3 or 4 albums with Annie and loved working with her.
I found 3 while I was.
Maybe it's 3,
but
my memory.
there could well be 4. Yeah.
No, I think it is 3.
But beautiful. I mean, it's a great thing. But yeah.
And Steve and I ended up helping her do some of the promotional work on TV tours around America and stuff like that. And that was a great experience. She did a show in Central Park. It was my only experience really of doing. My first experience of doing live sound. And I'm probably at that time, I don't know how old I was, just like 25, 26. We're in Central Park. I've never done live sound in my life before. All the road crew are like, "Who's this Herbert who doesn't know what the hell he's doing?" And I'm thinking, who am I? I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But for some reason they all, and I never forget it, I decided I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to, it is a very different discipline, live sound.
Scary.
Yeah. But I thought, you know what, let me just go for it. So I rented an Eventide H3000. There's a song called Legend in Your Living Room, which is on Diva. And in the middle 8 of it, I put the whole thing through a flanger. I was like, I'm going to do that in the thing. And the live guy was like, the monitor guy was like, if you do that, I'm turning the PA off. I'm like, you can't do that. All sorts of mayhem will
ensue.
Will ensue. Like you'll screw up this, you'll do it. And I did it, and he was screaming at me down the radio. But it was great, and it was great fun. It was. I really enjoyed live sound because I kind of thought, you know what, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll just break the rules. And
did you do more after that?
Yeah, I did quite a bit with Annie. And just other bands and bits and bobs. But it never became but I did love it. I loved the fact that you could do, in the studio, you used to do it all the time. Sometimes I'd see you mixing and it was a bit like a performance. I remember, I'll never forget, you were mixing, I think it was a 12-inch, I was assisting you, and there was a moment where there was a 808 tom fill that went down in frequency, and you had a Pultec across it boosting bass, and you flipped the frequency from 100 to 80 to 60. But the way in which you did it, I was just like, wow, that was like an artistic, that was like a dance. It was like a...
Yeah, but I mean, it's an instrument.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing, is the studio is an instrument. It's like, I always used to leave like 4 or 5 things on a mix to do manually.
Yeah.
Because for 2 reasons. Number one, there's the random chance element that something interesting might happen.
Yeah.
And you can always run it back again. Yeah. Even when it was an automated mix.
Yeah.
But just the fact that, frankly, I get bored. If I finished a mix and then you hit play on the desk and go, right, okay, now just put it on the 1/2 inch, and you kind of sit there like,
Yeah.
I mean, I like pressing buttons. I'm an engineer, for God's sake. I want to do this stuff. So of course there'd be a few reverbs to trigger here and there, and maybe I might leave a fader. Yeah. Just to but I mean that kind of thing on the Pultec, just follow the frequencies down as you're going across a tom fill or something.
It was great to see. It was. I remember being quite inspired by it because it felt like a performance. Julian Mendelssohn used to be great at that. Julian would sit there. Because I worked with him a lot at the time when 12-inch remixes were the thing, and he did a lot of stuff with Go West and a lot of the Frankie stuff as well. He was amazing at that. It would literally be like, I remember those sessions being quite long hours, but he would like flick into a mode where it was almost like he was the artist. He did great stuff with the AMS to get delays going, and it would literally be like watching the most incredible performance.
Well, it's like jamming a mix, I mean, it's like a dub mix. It's like all of that stuff. And I mean, a lot of those 12 inches that used to get done in the 80s, it would literally be set up a set of sounds on the desk, and then find some effects that you can switch on and off, and some things to mute in and out, record a pass of that, and then change it a little bit and record another pass of it, and then you'd end up with 3 reels of half-inch tape, and then 2 days of editing to chop out the interesting bits and turn that into the 12. You know.
And that, I was talking to some young producers the other day about 12-inch remixes and how that worked, and they couldn't get their head around it. It was like, we used to do a section, and then we kind of think about what we were going to do next and cut the half-inch and edit it together, and they'd be like, why? Of course, because the format doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't exist in the same way.
But there's another side to that, which I talk with my students about a lot, which is, you know, when you're listening to certain records and like there's these kind of savage moments where things change, like from a verse to a chorus, and suddenly it's like, whoa, you know. And it's like, how do you get that effect? Because one of my students says to me, how do you get that effect? I said, well, that's probably because the verses were mixed on a manual desk. The verses were mixed to the tape first. And then because it's a different balance, the choruses would all be mixed separately, and then you edit them together afterwards. And of course, you get these incredible kind of level changes. I mean, obviously, one of the great examples of that is on Owner of a Lonely Heart, which was Gary Langan. Because I think Trevor had said to him, chop out those 8 bars after the guitar solo, because I don't know what to do there. So just because it was, that's a rough mix. That single is a rough mix. And we never bettered it. So that was what we left. So it was me and Gary manually on the desk just before Christmas, you know, having been sort of 9 months into the album. And all the moves are manual, so that's me doing the stupid guitar panning and the reverb on and off on the guitar solo. And then, you know, there's this 8-bar thing where Gary went, I don't know what we're going to do there. And so eventually he went, I've got an idea, and he just cut them out. And it comes back in on that one guitar, and that is like it's a mud edit. You know, it's perfect. You know. And all those kinds of things are techniques that can be adapted to now. But of course, how do you do a dub mix in a computer? That's a tricky one.
It's interesting. You said 2 things there. One, you said 9 months into the album, and that's another thing that's changed dramatically. That, you know, because I worked with Trevor and Steve for a long time, and when they were working together, 9 months. If we'd got an album done in 9 months, that was a result. That was. There's a very famous story, and I think it's become a bit of an urban myth, but. When Trevor and Steve were working on 2 Tribes, they were working on the bass sound of 2 Tribes in Studio 2. Elvis Costello came in, recorded an album, went out, toured the album, came back to make his next album, and they were still working on the bass sound. I'm not sure how much.
Not quite that long. But it was 3...
but it,
I love the idea. It was 3 months a single. It was 3 months because, I mean, Relax, there were 5, if I remember right, there were 5 versions of Relax. Fully recorded, overdubbed, finished, mixed. And then eventually, like, you know, and then 2 Tribes, the whole thing was recorded. And then Trevor bought a 3324 and went, well, it's going to be better if we record it on the 3324, so let's do it all again. And I was kind of like, shall I just copy the multi-track over and not...
No one will know.
But it was like, no, we're re-recording, so we had to get all the machines back in and the whole thing. But I mean...
It worked.
It worked, I mean, you can't complain, can you?
The project that I worked on, there's quite a good display of that, is Grace Jones' Slave to the Rhythm album, which I think took 9 months from memory. And it was, strangely enough, just one song. It was
they had to turn it into an album to justify having...
So it was basically one single that they just had so many versions of that it got turned into an album. And there's a moment on that, so that was definitely 3324, that was Sony, the digital. And we mixed it, was it called 1610, the stereo? So that had just come out. And they had this funny little editing thing that you used to do. We mixed it at SARM East. And Trevor had to get a flight in the morning to go to New York to master it. So I think his cab was booked at 8 a.m. or something. And we'd mixed a load of it, but Steve had just got... We had the synclavier set up. You remember SARM East is teeny. We had the synclavier kind of... You know, you just... Nothing fitted in.
But
Steve had the synclavier set up, and he just got this new software update. And he said to Trevor, we'd finished the album, and Trevor was kind of getting all the stuff into his bag, ready to go. And he said to Trevor, "Oh, there's this new thing. If I sample something, I can pan it. It was mono sampling, but I can pan it left and right, and I can just put one channel out there and one channel out there." And he started messing around on the synclavier with two samples, one of it, and I went into record on the 1610, and I'd love to take the credit for this, but I did this because I was trying to test something out. So I caught him messing around on the synclavier, and what he was doing was really cool, and it was going flying all over the place. And then he was playing a sample 2 octaves up, and coming out one side, and another one 2 octaves down, coming out the other side. And Trevor was like, "That's amazing! That's amazing! If only we'd recorded it." I was like, "Well, we did." And we listened to it back. At one point, we edited into the stereo mix, and we put it on the album. And that took I'm not exaggerating, that took like half an hour, because his cab was waiting outside. Yeah. And that track ended up on the album. Yeah. So it's funny that the album took 9 months, and then that track was, I kid you not, it was like half an hour. Yeah. Because we didn't have there was no more time. But that whole, it took a different discipline to work on an album for 9 months. I remember what it's like. It's exhausting. And I mean, it's very hard to keep.
I mean, you literally dig a trench and put a helmet on, a tin helmet on, and then and that's it. You know, I'm here until the war's over. You know.
Yeah, and it's hard to keep. Oh, I found it hard, and credit to Trevor and Steve, because they were able to do it very well. To keep focus on and to keep objectivity, and to, day after day you're working on the same thing, trying to break through. And what they were both brilliant at is knowing when the right moment was, because you could just keep going forever. Yeah. And the moment I spoke about, the why moment, one of Steve's genius moments was kind of going, "That's it, we've got it, it's done." Yeah. Which is brave. But
knowing when to stop is really important. Yeah, it's really important. Yeah. Okay, so I have a burning question, right? Yeah. Because at the time when, for me personally, I was disappearing off into the very esoteric world of world music and kind of, escaping from that kind of pop music thing that we both started into, that's where we met. Yeah. You were actually going deeper into that. So you were working with I've got a list written down. It's S Club, Atomic Kitten, Jerry Halliwell, Will Young, Gareth Gates. Yeah. You went into that whole world. Now there's some was that with Steve?
That was with Steve. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of, obviously very high quality pop records in there. Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think about that period now? So how does that sit for you now? I'm interested to know.
I loved working on that stuff. I loved it because for me, probably if you would ask me now, the person I enjoyed working with, or the project I enjoyed working on the most, would be Annie. But that whole period was just after that, and in the midst of that, of those 3 albums, because as you well know, there's a real art to making cheese. And I'm not saying it's all cheese, but some of those records on purpose are a bit cheesy. I don't. The word cheesy. I don't like. But there's a real art. So for me, we did a track. The first track we did with this club was called Reach, and it had already been recorded and mixed, and the management just didn't think it was quite there. So they asked Steve to kind of look at it. And what we did was we turned up the volume on the kind of Phil Spector parody. We put a brass section on it and we mixed it in a different way. We kind of made it a bit of not a parody, but like a nod towards those types of records, because it was clearly inspired by that. So I think we just turned up the color knob on it quite drastically. And I really enjoyed that experience of working on that genre of music, because although it's, I think probably a lot of people now, the younger people that I work with, take the mickey out of it, take the mickey out of me for working on that. But actually, I remember looking back, and it was a craft. It was a real craft, getting those to sound right, transitions, the whole sonic experience. I'm really proud of those records. Extremely proud of them.
I think you should be, because I think they mark a particular period in time. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you completely. I think that whole thing of like going, okay, let's make this a bit more, Phil Spector, whatever it is, it is that you're choosing to kind of, it's like a kind of, almost like a pastiche kind of attitude. Yeah. But you can't do that. It has to be done with modernity. It has to be done with something that's cool and current and hip, and at the same time have that flavour. And that is really difficult. I mean,
it was.
I've been asked at certain times in my career to copy something, to get really close to something else. I can't do it. I mean, I just can't do it. I have no idea how to. As soon as I start copying something, it comes out completely different. It might come out all right, but it'll never
be the same.
But I couldn't do that. I mean, that's a skill.
There are people who do that very well.
There are,
But I agree with you. I couldn't do that.
But taking that sense, the feeling of something, and turning it into something new, it's a production technique.
And
it's simple.
What I think Steve was able to do there is use his experience in production of what could be termed more sophisticated projects, and just use that in this world. We did a lot of stuff with Boyzone and Ronan Keating, which ended up with a track called When You Say Nothing At All, which was a cover of an Alison Krauss song, which ended up on one of those Hugh Grant movies. I can't remember. I mean, it was a big hit. And it
would have been Weddings and a Funeral,
one of those. I can't remember. Someone's
Hugh Grant Does Something in London type film. Yes.
And again, that was actually a great song, but the challenge was it was ostensibly a country and western song. But it was a commercial country and western song. The challenge was, how do you get a song like that to be modern, cool, and relevant for the time? And it was difficult. Again, we did it at Metropolis with Peter Vitesse, and I mean, he's just an incredible musician. So it was very easy working with him and kind of sculpting a sound. But that, of all of the records from that period, that's the one and there's a track by S Club 7 called Don't Stop Moving, which for me, it's music that I love, that whole disco thing. I just loved working on that.
And there's a lot of remixes of that. I noticed today. Last night I was looking that up. Although I had this brilliant telephone conversation 2 days ago with a guy in a record store in Stroud, right, who is a Frankie fan. Right. And he reckons he's got 830 pieces of Frankie records. He's got 830. Because he collects them from different territories. But imagine how many mixes there were of those things. I mean, I lost track. I'm sure you did too. Because you did the record afterwards. You as well. I mean, it was like, that was just exciting.
I remember when I was answering the phone in my very early days at SARM, when I was answering the phone and answering the door at SARM, you remember the reception of SARM, the tape store was behind. So when there was no one in the building, or at 3 a.m, I would go into the tape store and just look. And you'd see all these tapes of incredible artists. And just to look at the multitrack or the half-inch, to me, was the most exciting thing. It was like literally my heaven. And I'd open the box and look at the track sheet and be like, whoa. Stevie Wonder, that's, you know, just I remember looking at it just being like, it being the most exciting thing. So it's...
Yeah, for me it was, because when I started at East, I used to go and they had all the outtakes of the Queen albums.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So I used to go and get, like, copy 24 tracks of Death on Two Legs. And put the faders up.
Yeah, yeah.
My God, this is like, you know, it was so exciting. Yeah, absolutely.
No, and look, we were there at that time. SARM was really exciting then. It was the centre of the music industry. I mean, if anyone who was anyone recorded at SARM.
Yeah.
Literally, you knew you were in the centre of cool at that time. Yeah. And it was a very cool building, and there were cool people there. And
you go downstairs and to go and get a sandwich or something, or down to the kitchen, and then there was the lounge next door, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And you'd be tripping over, whoever was in there. I mean, there was a 3-year period, I remember, 3-4 year period when I was there, which was I was there from 81 till 85. Once ABC came out, the first ABC album came out, we constantly had at least one record in the top 30 in the UK charts all the time. And then there was a 2-year, 3-year period where we had at least 2 or 3. Yeah. And quite often in the top 10.
Yeah.
And it was astonishing. It was an astonishing.
I don't know if you remember, but every Thursday, Top of the Pops, every Thursday night was a kind of ritual. Everyone would stop for dinner and watch Top of the Pops in that very small lounge area. I remember sitting there once, watching Top of the Pops with George Michael, Don Was, and someone else. It might have been like Meatloaf. Meatloaf. There's 3 complete, and it's just like 4 guys sitting watching Top of it. It was great, and actually George Michael, I think, was on it. It wasn't live. It was. I just remember it being very, very exciting, but not at all pretentious. There wasn't any. I think the reason people like George Michael enjoyed working there so much is it was cool. You could just, and there was Lucky in the kitchen. Yeah. And there was that lovely Australian couple. I can't remember their name. There was just a great vibe. Yeah. And credit to Jill and Trevor, because they kind of created that. Yeah. And it was very conscious. You could tell. Yeah. It was just a great place to be. Yeah. Anyway, I don't remember how we got
it doesn't matter. I miss those kinds of places, Yeah. I mean, although it's very interesting that I've discovered recently that there are actually more recording studios in the UK than there ever been, and there are more people employed in recording studios than there were back in those days.
Now, that's very interesting.
But I think the cool thing is now it seems that they've spread out across the country. So we've actually got studios in all the regions, which wasn't really like that when you started, was it?
No, I mean there wasn't Real World when I started, but there was the Manor. There were a few Ridge Farm. There were a few residential studios which were great.
There was always Rockfield, which was always like this kind of crazy outlier. It's an amazing studio.
What a great studio!
Oh yeah, it's fabulous.
Kingsley's incredible human being, and what an amazing studio. I mean, I've done a few projects there and loved it. Particularly, I've been there in the summer. It's just an amazing place to work. I think I remember. So my first session with you, I think actually, I'd worked all night on the night reception the night before.
Probably. It was.
And I got like a couple of hours sleep on the sofa, and then the buzzer went, and it was you and Midger and Bob Geldof. And then we obviously stayed up all night. And then when everyone had gone home, do you remember the maintenance used to be around the back of Studio 2, the very long, kind of basically a corridor. Yeah. I remember I was in there, and on the radio they were talking about what we'd done the night before. And I think it actually got played on the radio the next day.
It's weird. We finished the mix. Right, you remember we mixed. I mixed all night, and then you had brought in all your tapes from the things that you'd recorded, and so we spun those in onto the B-side version, which was just the backing track of the A-side with the spoken word bits, and then we made copies of those. Yeah, I grabbed the master tape under my arm, and I got in a cab and went to Utopia to work with Steve Angel to do the cut. Right. Yeah. And because that he's the one that had offered the free mastering time,
Right,
so
right.
I went off to him. At the same time, Bob took a 1/4 inch to Radio 1.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you went into the maintenance room and went, I can crash out finally.
Yeah.
I was stuck in traffic on my way to Utopia,
Right.
and Bob didn't get any traffic and got to Radio 1.
Right.
And so I actually heard it on the radio before I'd
In
mastered
traffic.
it.
Wow.
So I'm sitting in the cab making notes going, oh my God, I have to turn that bit up. So I remember walking into Steve Angel, slightly drunk, because Boy George had left a bottle of brandy, and I took that with me.
Yeah.
And going, and I might have been under the influence of certain other substances as well at the time, because I probably was, knowingly. And I walk into the room and go, right, well, I'd never met him before.
Right.
Poor guy. I mean, he gets me up 36 hours, I think, by this point. Eyes out on stalks, slightly off his head. I mean, even more off his head than I normally was.
Yeah.
And going, right, well, we've got that. I can see at least 5 EQ and compression changes. We've got to do this now.
Yeah.
And he was amazing. I mean, it was amazing because there are 5 or 6 EQ and compression changes in the mastering of that. Right. Done live, of course, because it's... it's analogue.
I just remember the next day kind of going, wow, what just happened?
It was a shock, wasn't it?
It was a bit of a shock. I think at the beginning of it, I don't think you, me, or anyone really knew how big it was going to be.
Yeah.
And I don't even think Bob or they didn't know who was. I remember them saying, "I'm not sure if anyone's going to turn up. It might just be us."
Yeah.
And it was very vague who was going to turn up.
Yeah.
And there came a point where, because it was just the 3 of us representing the studio.
Yeah.
And suddenly all these TV crews arrived, and
there was 7 TV crews. Yeah.
And I was because you and Steve were running. I was kind of like, okay. They were like, we need a makeup room. All right, go over there. Like it was so I remember calling Jill. It was a Sunday.
Yeah.
I remember calling Jill and saying, this has gone a bit crazy. Like you need to get here.
She came in, didn't she?
Yeah, her and Trev came in, and then Trev did that whole. Doing the choir thing. And
the whole thing that no one ever used. Yeah. It's great. Sorry, Trev.
It looked great on the...
It looked really good when you were waving your arms around, but unfortunately... but yeah, well, it was great. And I was so glad you called Jill, because I was having this problem that we had all the paparazzi photographers in the studio area, because anything that you see of that day where someone's singing, they're actually being recorded. Very few things were posed for the cameras. There wasn't the time.
Yeah.
And I kept getting these bloody paparazzi photographers walking in front of the mic.
Yeah.
Particularly when we were doing the choir. And it was great because Jill was there. And I said, Jill, can you stop them from doing that? She went, no problem. Because, of course, it wasn't a problem for Jill.
Yeah.
Because she'd been a school teacher.
Yeah. And she was amazing, I have to say. I remember my interview with her. I walked in. And she kind of looked at me and she was like, why do you want this job? And I was like, I was probably 17. I was like, because I love music. And she just looked at me and she went, all right, I think I'll give you a go.
Yeah.
And that was no interview. And she was always really lovely to me.
Jill was, I mean, there's a lot of, I've heard a lot of negative comments about Jill, and I'm sure that there are some business things which people maybe have a genuine beef over. As a boss, I thought she was fab.
Yeah.
If you worked hard and did your job, she had your back.
100%.
100% every time.
Yeah.
And she always had my back, and I really appreciated that. And she was kind and she was funny.
Yeah. And often quite inspirational. She'd often kind of be like, you're doing great, do this. I remember there was a time when the lack of sleep was getting on top of me, and I kept turning up late. But it was genuinely because I was exhausted. But I knew, like, okay, I just had to be there, but I just couldn't get myself out of bed. And she sat me down and she was like, Heff, do you want this? Like, because if you want this, you got to stop being late, because I can't allow you to be late and not it. So the way in which she never kind of went in a school, it was a proper school teacher. She was trying to get something out of me, and I learned a lot from that. And in fact, now I manage younger producers. A lot of the stuff, there's 2 main people I learnt from, it's Jill and Simon Fuller. Simon Fuller managed Steve Lipson and myself at one point, and Simon was an extraordinary manager. I mean, he would be able to zoom right into the detail. He'd come in when we would, because he managed Annie Lennox. He'd come in and he'd listen to a track and make a very broad comment about its positioning on radio, and then and then be able to zoom right in and make a comment about the vocal reverb, or you know, something very, very detailed. And he was able to do that not just with music. He was able to do that with everything. The way he ran his company, he was able to be macro and mini at the same within a split second. It was really impressive. For me, there was, when we were making that Diva album, something happened in my, I can't even remember what it was. Something happened in my personal life. I was a bit upset. Oh, I split up with my girlfriend. And he took me to one side and he was like, "We've got you if you need to take time off." He was very supportive when he didn't really need to be. I mean, he was managing a massive company at that point, but he spotted the kind of emotional requirement, and so I learned a lot from him.
So that kind of brings me on to probably what's going to be our final kind of question, right? That's, you've had a really interesting career, right? Because, you know, you started out in engineering, and you kind of in and out of the sort of peripheral side of production, But we're here in the PMC studio, and you work with them, and you're also managing young producers, and you're following that kind of mentoring path with them as well. So this is like the modern thing, the portfolio career.
Okay.
And I know you kind of looked at me with a kind of, you had a funny look when you gave me a funny look when I said the portfolio career. But I mean, that's, you know, certainly in education now, that's what we're looking at talking to students about, because it's very difficult to make just a living unless you're super successful at one of these things out of the industry in the way that it was easier to do perhaps in the 80s and the 90s. And I think for us older guys, it's kind of interesting to be doing lots of different things anyway, isn't it? You know, but I mean, what do you think of that now? I mean, what do you think of, you know, when if you're looking at these young people that you're mentoring and managing, you know, what do you say to them about career path? Do you talk about that with them?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the reason I do that is not because of the making a living part, because frankly, you don't make much of a living out of it. But it's because I remember what it was like to be that age. And I had great people around me, but it was a different time. So often at the age of 18, 20, 24, it felt a very lonely place. You know, and my career at SARM, I can't remember what age I was when I left SARM, but Stephen Lipson and I went and worked on it, and it was a very successful time, but it was a bit overwhelming, to be honest. You know, I'd suddenly find myself in a studio. I remember the first session I did in LA, I walked in and the tape op, it was at Ocean Way, the tape op was fit guy, young, fit guy. I walked in, he was playing the piano, he was an incredible pianist, unbelievable engineer. Then picked up the guitar, and I was like, "Can I have a cup of tea?" It's really like, what am I doing here? And how can I ask this guy? I felt completely out of my depth. But I tell that story just because I've been through that experience.
But it's imposter syndrome. I mean, isn't that the fundamental disease of the recording engineer and the record producer? Is imposter syndrome. I mean, it's the biggest, it's the most difficult thing to get through.
It is really hard, but I have enough experience now to deal with it. And so when I'm managing or mentoring or even just talking to younger producers, there's that part. I have a lot of experience in that space, which for some reason I'm able to communicate in a way that they get. And so when they hit those moments where the imposter syndrome kicks in or there's a confidence issue, I'm able to kind of relate because I remember it. And I remember actually genuinely it was quite painful. So for me, I quite like trying to steer them through that pain. Because whatever way it doesn't always have to be painful, but it's going to be a bit of a struggle. So I really enjoy using not just that, but also the technical side, because frankly, the stuff that you taught me is probably not going to be taught to anyone in these colleges. Maybe you're doing it in your college, but maybe you are. But I think you're a rarity.
I think you'd be very happy to know that actually that there's a lot of places around the country now that are really.
That's great.
I mean, there are some amazing courses that are for young people to go and do. You know,
that's amazing. And
and of course, the other thing I have to say at this moment is don't forget. There's loads of really good stuff about that on recordproduction.com. So, you know, watch, click like, you know, subscribe.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sorry, that was the plug.
That's fine. There's lots of things like having been through that journey, knowing what it likes. You know what it's like with being an engineer. It's about bravery, and it's about having courage. And that courage is based in experience. You can't have the courage to go rah, or to get a Pultec unless you have experience to back it up. And so what I really enjoy is trying to help people to build their courage, build their bravery. Because for me, this is slightly controversial, but one of my big concerns about the UK commercial music scene at the moment is it's completely lacking any bravery. Whereas and I know I'm sounding like an old fart here, but I'm going to say it anyway. At that time at SARM, UK music was at the pinnacle of what was going on. Every time I went to LA, people would be like, even that assistant was like, "Whoa, how do you guys make that sound? How do you do that?" And I don't even know if we knew the answer, but what it was based in was bravery. Mavericks like Trevor and Steve, all of the people that were making incredible music at that time, being really brave and pushing the boundaries. And that's, in this country, not stopped, but it's nowhere near the level it was. And I think that's a terrible shame, because what that creates is homogeneity. It creates, everything sounds a bit the same, and we've also, you know, experiencing this insane thing where everything's limited to within an inch of its life or beyond distortion, and so we used to be like Slave to the Rhythm when that came out. Steve Lipson mixed that, and it sounds incredible. I still listen to it now, and it sounds incredible.
Astonishing piece of work. Yeah.
There's no music that's come out of the, and I might be wrong, but I haven't heard anything that came out of the UK that is anything like that now. It's just all this seems a bit the same. And there are guys in America, some of them English actually, who are doing great work that's you know, around bass management and compression and limiting that I think is pushing the boundary. But we seem to have lost that a little bit here. And I know it's to do with budgets, and I know it's to do with the lack of studios, but I would love to be part of a movement that tried to reinstill that bravery somehow. So that's part of why I do it as well.
That's great. I mean, it's the best possible reason for doing it too.
Yeah. So
there you go.
Yeah, no, but there's something about me, I quite like passing on information, and there's a lot of old crap in this nugget, so I'd quite like passing that on. But actually the reason I want to pass it on is I'd really like the new generation of producers from this country in particular to remember bravery, to remember that kind of sense of, wow, I'm just going to do this, as opposed to, I'll just use this splice sample and I'll download this from that and I'll put this together and it.
Well, also, but don't you think as well that I mean, I really understand that, and it's that raw creativity, yeah. But I think there's also an enormous amount of pressure now because of the internet, because you know, people read stuff. There's blogs to read. There's all these, and there's all these attitudes towards, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. Don't do it like this and do it like that, and don't, you know. It's like that whole kind of ethos in you know. There's always someone who's a kind of taste maker, who's saying this is how things should be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And frankly, you know, I mean, I came out of the 60s and 70s, you know, and I mean, in the 70s when, you know, during the punk period, it was,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
really?
yeah,
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
I'm really going to do that. You
yeah.
know, whereas now there seems to be a kind of a movement towards conforming to certain standards.
Yeah, and maybe that's the way in which society's sort of structured now, and that's a kind of a bigger conversation. But the one thing for me, because I know it, music, Trevor, Steve, even Stock Aitken Waterman, those guys were the tastemakers.
Yeah.
They made records, and everyone else around the world was like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
A bit like the Beach Boys and the Beatles used to have in the 60s.
Yeah.
How are they doing that? What's that? What are they doing? And actually, I think if you to ask, because I was there, I don't know what we were doing. I have no idea. But I know that we were creating great environments to work in, where bravery was rewarded. Trevor would love it. I remember if I'd do something on the console that he wasn't expecting, he'd love it. He'd almost make you feel like you were free to do that, and that's
and I think it is also. But then also the other part of that is that nowadays there are no budgets. And so
no, I get it.
To have that artistic freedom is actually quite difficult in a studio scenario now, because everyone's looking at the clock and how much money it's costing.
Yeah, but agreed. Except there are budgets, because all you need is a laptop and a pair of speakers.
Yeah,
so if you've got the time, there are budgets, because the budget is your time. And so you can. I did it with some guys I used to manage. They were feeling a little bit stuck, and we rented an Airbnb and we just set them up by the sea, and rented some synths and got a drum kit, and I just left them there for a few days, and they came out with what ended up being big hits, because they were just free and were able to be brave and all of the things that we've talked about. So it's and interesting with them so I met them at Tape, which has got PMC speakers. So from a very early stage of their career, they were working on QB1 XBDs, which are big PMC speakers. They work ostensibly in hip hop. So they were working on very high-end speakers. And as a result of that, partially because they were really good, but also because they were working on really good speakers from the inception to mixing, the sonics of what they do are really good. So whenever they go, and I speak to them quite often, whenever they go to other studios, they're a bit lost. They walk in and they're like, because that's all they've ever known. I mean, they've worked on other stuff before, but if they go into, I don't want to say anything bad about any other speaker, but if they go into a room with a slightly cheaper speaker, they find it really, they don't know where the stability is, where's the ground. Because when you've got really, and that's the thing that you were saying, that yes, there are a gazillion YouTube channels about this plugin, this way of getting Atmos to do that, and all these different mixing techniques. It's all irrelevant. You just need a pair of speakers and a great room. Without that, all of that stuff about plugins.
you need great speakers, great room, and you need to learn how to listen. Because listening is where it all comes from. But it's I know it sounds like a stupid thing to say, but like, for me, it's like that idea of listen to the music, listen to what you're doing, and listen to loads of other stuff. And always make sure when you go into the studio, you know, that you listen. Whenever you go into a new studio, I mean, the first thing I do is I sit there for half an hour listening to tracks that I know really well, so I know what's going on in that room. Because even the same pair of speakers in a different room is going to sound different. It's all that variation, isn't it? But
it's what we were talking about earlier. I mean, I always say to the younger producers that I work with, stop hearing and start listening, because there is a tendency now to just. Actually, it's a societal thing because of phones and how instant everything is. It's easy to not pay attention. So because of, I think, both of our experience, the progression of my career, am very good at paying attention because I learned that through mixing. So if I'm doing something, I'm doing it. I'm not. It's like, you know, if a little kid's playing with a toy, they're not thinking about paying the mortgage, or they're playing with the toy. I learnt that through mixing, because I can't mix if I'm not paying attention. I actually can't do it. I'll just walk away and do something else. And I think because a lot of younger producers and engineers are born into this world of fast attention, that's one of the things I try and help them with, is the attention part. It's the almost it's not meditative, but it's that focus. Really pay attention.
I think that's a very interesting point, actually. That's very interesting.
And I think that's probably, if I think about it, that's probably why I feel a lot of music coming out of the UK in particular sounds a bit all the same, because maybe people aren't paying the right type of attention. And I'm being really judgmental, and I don't mean to be, but I don't think it's disputable that records are not as brave as they once were.
I think it's a very interesting point, and I think it's certainly something that should hopefully create some debate around that, you know, because I think it's a really important subject.
Yeah, it's weird, because if you look at film, there's some great films being made with attention to detail. So for some reason it hasn't affected that. They might be a bit formulaic, and they might be to do with the algorithm, and you know, you say this stuff because a lot of it's coming from Netflix, but they're still great. And I'm not saying there aren't great records being made. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I don't think the same attention is being paid. I think it's because it's not coming from an organic source. It's generally coming from samples that are being bought from the same sample library that your competitors are using. It's all becoming a bit bleh. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. Those students of mine that I work with that are using samples, there's not that many, because a lot of the artists that we've got are bands or solo artists, but they're all kind of acoustic or electric bands. Is because we insist, if they're doing the production parts of the course, because they don't have to do production in their degree. If they do, one of the things that we're very insistent on, well, I'm very insistent on, is that they learn how to record things. So quite often what they end up doing is making their own samples. So they'll get a drum kit in and they will sample it themselves, and they will do that. And then they create individual sounds for themselves, like we did in the 80s. And that, they love doing it.
And that's great.
And you give them the skills to do it, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
If you don't give them the skills to do it, they're going to struggle.
Yeah.
You know, so it's also that thing. It's like a big message is, you know, pass the knowledge on, which is exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
And exactly why I got into education is because we need to pass the knowledge on, because that's what happened to us. We learned from great engineers. You know, we were lucky that we learned from those people that were around us, you know, Julian and Gary, and Steve Lipson, for you. I mean, like, you know, what a great school to go to.
No, it was amazing.
And, you know, that's the thing, pass it on, pass it on, pass it on, because, you know, we're passionate about it. We love it.
No, but, and a lot of the young producers are also passionate about it.
I know.
But they're coming into, you know, I was passionate about it when I was 17, walked into SARM when we first met. I was passionate about it, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had no idea. And these young guys are coming in wide-eyed, passionate, but I suppose what I'm trying to help them with is protecting them from some, because there is you know, the industry's like, and I'm sure you've had it, there's a lot of darkness out there, particularly in the business end.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And that, for someone young, I remember, can be bewildering. Like, I'm going to say, I've done this work for you, it's 6 months later, why am I not getting paid? Most under the industries, that doesn't make sense, you know. So it's, that's the part I really enjoy is teaching people not to get freaked out by that and how to deal with it and how to
and helping them deal with it.
Because it's tough, and that's the other thing is it's, you know, back when we were working at SARM, it was quite easy. The money was different. Are we out?
No, it's fine. I think that noise attracted your attention.
Yeah, that's sorry. Yeah, it was, exactly.
The remuneration of the model, the business model, was different.
Yeah.
So Julian, Gary, yourself could earn, and myself could earn great money mixing, remixing, doing. You know, you'd never get a budget to do an extended remix of a track now. It's not going to happen. And the budgets are less. People are getting paid. This is actually, when I think about it, people are getting paid less to do mixes now than they were
in the 80s.
In the 80s.
Oh yeah. I mean, my, you know, I know that, you know, sort of daily rate, if I was to go off and record something for someone nowadays, is half what I was earning in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, and you know,
it is what it is.
You know, it is what it is. It is what it is. But I mean, it doesn't stop us from doing it.
No, absolutely. And as you say, the only way to keep it going is to diversify and just do other stuff and
exactly. And it keeps it interesting. And I think it's also it's an interesting path for a lot of young engineers and producers now.
Yeah.
Is, you know, a lot of them are players too.
Yeah. Which is great.
So it's like, okay, you know, maybe you can earn some money from this. And it's like, you were talking about live sounds, you know, you can go and do live sound because you can earn 50, 100 quid a night just going to the local venue and actually doing the front of house for them. And, you know, it all adds in.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's all relevant experience as well.
And I wish, actually, you asked me about earlier, I wish I'd spent more time doing live stuff because it's great experience. And that we talked about it earlier, that when you're mixing on a pair of near fields, you can get a great mix. Even, you know, a lot of mix engineers are mixing on headphones now. Yeah. The challenge with that is more and more, particularly in hip hop and R&B, more and more artists don't have musicians. They're playing your mix without the vocal in a big auditorium or a stadium. So when the bass end is not right, which I think is challenging to do on near fields and headphones, that all becomes a big mush. So for me, really high-end monitors, particularly in that genre of music, are key. And PMC clearly tick that box. But you know, that's a game changer for me. So this habit of, you know, there are some great headphones out there. Audi's make amazing headphones. There are several other brands with great headphones. And you can do a mix on at home and it will sound great. But when you play it on a big system, you're not going to get the same result. Yeah, I'm always impressed by anybody that can mix on a pair of headphones. Cause there's a lot of young mix engineers who are doing it. I know. I can't judge spatial stuff properly on headphones. That's because of your experience. All the years of experience. When we were mixing stuff when Walkmans started to, or I was mixing stuff when Walkmans started to come out, so headphones became important, but they weren't the be-all. Now it's, I don't know what, I think it's 80% of people. 85. In the UK it's 85%, and in some other countries it's up to 90%. Percent of music is consumed on headphones. So, you know, it's a big difference. It's a very big difference. I check everything on headphones now. And of course. But for 25 years I didn't bother. No, same. It was same. Like, I remember I worked with Sade, Mike Peeler. He was the first guy I ever saw. He checked everything on headphones. And I remember being very impressed by it, but I never got into the discipline because I remember thinking that's a really smart thing. Mike was a great engineer. We lost him last year, didn't we? Great engineer. Great engineer. Very nice chap too. Really lovely chap. I didn't meet him very often, but I worked with him a bit. He was lovely, and as you say, really good. Like really good. Those records, those Sade records are amazing. Beautiful. Lovely sounding records. Lots of detail, but lots of space. Loved Neve. He loved a Neve console.
That was his biggest downfall.
We've all got our flaws.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a great guy.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'm pretty sure that the album I worked with him on, he produced. It's a good example of a very different type of producer to Trevor or Steve. But just, you know, for that project, he was perfect. Because he just made sure that the environment was right, and he made sure it sounded great. The artist and the band was experienced enough to kind of do their own thing. But he was the perfect engineer because he just sat in the middle and made the equipment transparent. He was great at that. He was great. I remember we were mixing a track. You know, sometimes when you're mixing a track and there's one thing, this was a track called Paradise on that album. It's got a conga pattern, which is, I think, from an RX-5. It was a program conga pattern. I think it was a 2-bar pattern. It was quite repetitive. And for some reason, we're mixing this track, and for some reason, none of us had noticed the congas were obscenely loud. And you know, like sometimes you can get into that where no one notices. Yeah. There's 4 or 5 people in the room, and it's 5-6 hours go by.
Yeah, there's at least 3 Van Morrison albums where the hi-hat is louder than the vocal.
Yeah. And no one kind of says, I remember Mike saying, there's something wrong. And he said, I'm going to go and listen in the car. And he went and listened to the car, came back, and he was like, it's the congas. And we were all like, oh my God, that's extraordinary. When I say like, it was crazy loud. It was insanely loud.
But it's that habitual listening as well.
Yeah,
It is the one thing that I love about mixing in a computer.
Yes.
Is that I can do 3-4 hours on a track and then go, oh, I'm bored now.
Yeah.
Flip to another song and then come back to exactly the same place and go, oh, I wasn't bored. That's just like, I can't hear the bass. Yeah. I need to turn that up. Because you get habituated to a particular
No,
balance,
and you know, that is amazing. I agree. And sometimes if I'm mixing an album, I'll, you know, spend a couple of hours on each one and just keep going through them like that. And that's a great way. There's huge pluses for mixing in the box. But it, you know, and I'm sure you do, because I remember the way you operated. I really miss the sort of tactile thing. I really miss that, which is why I've got this here.
Yeah, the physicality of it. Yeah,
but it's still not the same. I really miss hands-on with the desk, with the outboard, with the tape machine. I miss the excitement of dropping in and out. I miss, you know, all of that.
Oh yeah, you've got to get it right. Don't get it right.
But there came a point where, to me, it became, when I first started engineering, when I kind of stepped out of being a tape op into it, of course it used to freak the living daylights out of me because you got it wrong. And I remember deciding one day to just be like, I'm really good at this, so it's fine. And it never freaked me out again. It never became a thing. I just was. But I look back now, it's pretty serious what we were doing. You know?
Oh yeah. Get it wrong and you erase something and you can't get it back. It's you know, it's destructive. You know, it's a thing. But I mean, then that's also, again, attention.
Yes.
Attention. Yeah. You're doing that. You're dropping in and out on absolutely critical stuff all day, 10, 12 hours worth of that. Yeah. And your focus has to be perfect all the time. Everybody else can mess up around you. That's fine, but you can't mess up, because if you mess up, you might destroy something good.
No, absolutely. And
the pressure is enormous, and being able to handle that pressure is another thing again. You know?
And even that, you know, the tactile thing on a desk of muting and unmuting and doing all that stuff live, you can do that here, but for some reason I don't tend to. I remember if we were working on a big SSL or something, I remember I really enjoyed kind of putting up a rough mix and just muting stuff randomly in random places, and the console almost being like another instrument. And that's the other part I miss. If I'm working on an album, so as you said, you're working on an album, recording an album, and you load the song and your monitor mix is where you left it. for whatever reason, this is probably my bad, I don't reset the monitor. I just keep going. Whereas in the old days, I had to. So on purpose, I'd do the monitor mix different. So, traditionally you start with the drums and then the bass.
Yep.
But sometimes I'd start with the vocal and work backwards because you'd come up with interesting balance changes.
Yep.
Which sometimes, and Y is a great example of this, sometimes would really affect the mix. Because I did that one day and started with the vocal and realised the vocal had to be ridiculously loud. Because when it was such an incredible performance that when it was, it had a different emotional impact.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who, it might have been Simon, I can't remember, was a bit concerned that it was too loud. But and I only came across that because I did the monitor mix the other way around. So I started with the vocal and kind of thought, what happens if the vocal is everything, is all encompassing, is ridiculously loud. And from an engineering perspective, I remember thinking, this isn't sonically as good. Like the bass end doesn't deliver in the same way as the vocals, but emotionally it's much better. And to be honest, I was young and a bit of an idiot. I remember thinking, I'd rather be recognised as doing sonically great stuff. There was I remember being torn on that. But thankfully, I think Steve convinced me to go with the emotional side. But as a mix engineer or producer, what sometimes that's what the experience is, of knowing when that's the right decision, knowing when it feels right, and that's the part that I really enjoy passing on to other people.
That's all we got time for today, and because I believe you've got to get somewhere.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously we need to go back and Mike needs to edit. So, thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Heff.
You're more than welcome.
It's been
Thank you.
Really great to see you again.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Fantastic to hear you talk about your career.
Thank you.
And just those two little things that we would ask you to do. One is, if you like it, please like. And if you want to, please subscribe. And don't forget, you can always put a comment down and we will answer any comments that you have. Okay. Cheerio. Thank you. Bye-bye then.